A warning: this video contains graphic descriptions and may not be suitable for all viewers. On November 20th, 1990, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man, by the name of Chikatilo, set off from his home in Russia's Novocherkassk with a peculiar item in his possession: a large jar filled with beer that he had obtained from a local park kiosk. As he roamed the streets, Chikatilo eagerly approached anyone who was willing to engage in conversation. Little did he know that a fateful encounter awaited him, one that would unravel the horrifying truth behind one of the most notorious serial murder cases in Russian history. But before we dive into the chilling tale, if you like stories about true crime or you're new to our content, please show your support and hit the like button, subscribe to our channel and enable all notifications. So, let's delve into the gripping narrative that unfolded. Andrei Chikatilo, born on October 16, 1936, in the village of Yablokny, Ukraine, had a challenging start in life. Ukraine was going through a famine due to Joseph Stalin's forced agricultural changes when he was born. Chikatilo's parents were hardworking farmers who lived in a tiny one-room hut. Although they didn't receive wages for their labor, they were granted a small plot of land behind their humble home to cultivate. The family hardly ever had enough food. Chikatilo didn't eat bread until he was 12 years old. He and his family had to resort to eating grass and leaves to try to fend off hunger. Throughout his childhood, Chikatilo's mother, Anna, repeatedly told him that before he was born, his older brother named Stepan had been kidnapped and cannibalized by starving neighbors when he was 4 years old. However, no one could confirm whether this incident actually happened or if there was even a brother named Stepan. Despite that, Chikatilo remembered his childhood as being plagued by poverty, ridicule, hunger, and the war. When the Soviet Union joined the Second World War, Chikatilo's father, Roman, was drafted into the Red Army. He later became a prisoner of war after getting injured in combat, and later labeled a traitor for being captured. From 1941 to 1944, Chikatilo witnessed the devastating effects of the Nazi occupation of Ukraine, which he described as horrifying. He saw bombings, fires, and shootings, and he and his mother would hide in cellars and ditches to stay safe. There was one instance where Chikatilo and his mother had to watch their own hut burn down. Since his father was away at war, Chikatilo and his mother shared a single bed. He had a chronic bedwetting problem, and his mother would scold and beat him for every incident. In 1943, Chikatilo's mom had a baby girl named Tatyana. It's worth noting that Chikatilo's dad couldn't have been the father since he was drafted in 1941. During the war, many Ukrainian women were unfortunately raped by German soldiers, leading to speculation that Tatyana might have been conceived as a result of such an assault. Adding to the unsettling nature of this possibility, Chikatilo and his mom lived in a small one-room hut, which means the rape might have occurred in Chikatilo's presence. In September 1944, Chikatilo started going to school. He was a shy and studious child, but physically weak. He often attended school wearing homemade clothes, and by 1946, he suffered from hunger due to the post-war famine that affected much of the Soviet Union. The lack of food caused him to faint both at home and at school, making him an easy target for bullies who would mock his small stature and timid demeanor. At home, Chikatilo and his sister endured constant criticism from their mother. Tatyana later recalled that despite the hardships faced by their parents, their father was kind while their mother was harsh and unforgiving towards them. Chikatilo found solace in reading and had a knack for memorizing information. He often studied at home to boost his self-esteem and compensate for his nearsightedness, which made it difficult for him to read the blackboard in class. His teachers considered him an excellent student and regularly praised him for his academic achievements. During his teenage years, Chikatilo was like a star student and a passionate communist. He became the editor of his school newspaper at the young age of 14, and just a couple of years later, he took on the role of chairman of the Communist Party Committee for Students. He was really into reading communist literature and was even given the responsibility of organizing street marches. Chikatilo did struggle with learning due to headaches and a poor memory, but he managed to be the only student from his collective farm who completed the final year of study and graduated with excellent grades in 1954. As he hit puberty, Chikatilo felt shy around women, especially when it came to his first crush, Lilia Beresheva, whom he had gotten to know through the school newspaper. Despite his feelings for her, he was always nervous around her and never mustered the courage to ask her out on a date. Around the same time, he discovered that he faced a challenging issue of chronic impotence, which made him even more socially awkward and filled him with self-hatred. He decided to take matters into his own hands and take what he wanted by force. That year, Chikatilo jumped upon an 11-year-old friend of his younger sister, wrestled her to the ground and sexually assaulted her. And so began a string of horrifying crimes that shed light on the depths of his unsettling borderline personality disorder and sadistic tendencies. After graduating from school, Chikatilo decided to try his luck and applied for a scholarship at Moscow State University. Although he did well on the entrance examination, his grades fell short of the university's standards for acceptance. Chikatilo had his own theory, speculating that his father's controversial war record played a role in his scholarship rejection. However, the truth was that there were other students who performed better in the highly competitive exam. Instead of pursuing enrollment at another university, Chikatilo took a different path. He headed to the city of Kursk and worked as a laborer for 3 months. It was in 1955 when he finally enrolled in a vocational school with the goal of becoming a communications technician. That same year, Chikatilo also entered into his first serious relationship with a local girl who was 2 years younger than him. On 3 occasions, the couple attempted intercourse, although on each occasion, Chikatilo was unable to sustain an erection. She broke off the relationship after 18 frustrating months. He then joined the Soviet Army to complete his compulsory military service. After finishing his military service, Chikatilo went back to his hometown and moved in with his parents. He started working with them on the collective farm, but things took a different turn when he met a young divorced woman. They got into a relationship that lasted for about 3 months. However, their attempts at having intercourse didn't go well, and the woman sought advice from her friends on how to help Chikatilo with his problem. Unfortunately, this led to most of his peers finding out about his impotence. This was a massive embarrassment for him. Local girls were going behind his back, whispering that he was impotent. Chikatilo felt such shame that he tried to take his own life, with his mother and some neighbors rescuing him from the attempt at the last minute. He was so mortified that he ran away from his homeland and all that he knew, to a small port city called Rostov-on-Don in Russia. His family joined him shortly after, and his younger sister, Tatyana, who saw his chronic shyness and how awkward he was with women, resolved to find him a wife. Chikatilo finally tied the knot with a woman named Feodosia Odnikiva in 1963. Interestingly, it wasn't a love at first sight kind of situation. Chikatilo claimed that his younger sister actually introduced them, and before he knew it, they were getting hitched just 2 weeks after meeting each other. It felt more like an arranged marriage, with his sister and her husband playing the decisive roles in bringing them together. Chikatilo later mentioned that his sex life with his spouse was quite limited, and once they realized he had trouble maintaining an erection, they reached an agreement to conceive through alternative methods. Feodosia became a mom in 1965 when she welcomed her daughter, Ludmila, into the world. Then, 4 years down the line, in 1969, she had a son named Yuri. At that point, Chikatilo had started working as a Russian language and literature teacher in Novoshakhtinsk. However, he wasn't exactly the best teacher out there. Despite having good knowledge in his subjects, he struggled to keep his students in line and often became the target of their mockery. He believed they exploited his humble demeanor, making it challenging for him to maintain discipline in the classroom. His resentment towards them grew, and other teachers started noticing some disturbing behaviors from him. As he wandered around, seemingly without a clear purpose, Chikatilo's actions took a sinister turn. He was caught loitering near public toilets and the girls' dormitory, secretly watching young girls with the hope of catching them undressing. In an attempt to strike up conversations, he even resorted to bribing students with sweets. His behavior became increasingly unsettling and predatory. Chikatilo committed his first known sexual assaults upon his students, a 15-year-old girl, and viciously assaulted another, after locking her up in his classroom. He was not punished for either of these acts. In response to the increasing number of complaints lodged against him by pupils, Chikatilo's career as a teacher ended in March 1981. Around the same time, he landed a gig as a supply clerk at a construction materials factory in Rostov. This job had Chikatilo constantly on the move, traveling to various parts of the Soviet Union. On the evening of December 22nd, Chikatilo committed his first murder. He secretly purchased an old dilapidated hut and lured a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Zakotnova from the local bus stop. He attempted to rape her, but failed due to his impotence, and was so enraged that he choked her and stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen before throwing her body into the nearby Greshevka River. There were plenty of clues pointing towards Chikatilo's involvement in Zakotnova's murder. Not only that, but a witness had provided the police with a detailed description of a man who looked strikingly similar to Chikatilo, seen talking to the girl at the location where she was last seen alive. Surprisingly, despite these compelling facts, the authorities decided to arrest a 25-year-old laborer named Alexander Kravchenko, who had a previous stint in prison. After his first murder, Chikatilo found it hard to fight off his murderous urges, sometimes even ending business trips early just to avoid the temptation of seeking out another victim. But by 1982, Chikatilo could no longer resist his homicidal urges. The desire to experience it again had completely taken over him. He established a pattern of approaching his victims at bus or railway stations, enticing them to a nearby forest or other secluded area, before killing them, either by stabbing, battering, or strangling them. Chikatilo's adult female victims were often prostitutes or homeless women whom he would lure to secluded areas with promises of alcohol or money. For his younger victims, Chikatilo had a cunning method of luring them to secluded places. He employed various tricks during their initial conversation, such as offering help or companionship, showing them a shortcut, or enticing them with the prospect of rare stamps, films, coins, food, or candy. Once alone with his victims, he would swiftly overpower them. He would bind their hands together using a rope and then stuff their mouths with mud to stop them from screaming. In most cases, Chikatilo would try to sleep with his victims, but things took a dark turn when his impotence got in the way. Frustrated by his inability to perform, he would fly into a murderous rage. Strangely enough, he found sexual satisfaction only when he witnessed his victims suffering. Once he had taken a life, Chikatilo would make some basic attempts to hide the body before leaving the crime scene. As more and more bodies were discovered, and the striking similarities in the wounds inflicted on the victims became evident, the Soviet authorities couldn't ignore the grim reality anymore. A serial killer was clearly at large. The brutal nature of the murders and the meticulous dissections performed on the victims led the police to come up with a few theories. They speculated that the killings might have been carried out by a group involved in organ trafficking, a satanic cult up to no good, or perhaps the work of someone with severe mental illness. The sheer savagery of the acts left investigators grappling for answers, exploring different possibilities to make sense of the gruesome crimes. Several young men admitted to the murders, but here's the catch: they were often mentally challenged youths who confessed after enduring lengthy and sometimes brutal interrogations. Even as the police managed to extract confessions from certain suspects, more bodies kept turning up, indicating that those who confessed couldn't possibly be the elusive killer they were desperately searching for. By November 1985, things were really heating up in the investigation. They brought in a special agent named Isa Kostoyev to oversee everything. It had gotten so serious that they had a whole team of 15 procurators and 29 detectives dedicated solely to the manhunt. The next month, the police started patrolling the railway stations in Rostov again, and undercover female officers were instructed to hang around bus and train stations, blending in with the crowd. The search was on, and they were throwing all their resources into catching the culprit. Chikatilo kept a close eye on the investigation, avidly reading newspaper articles that detailed the ongoing manhunt for the killer, which were starting to make their way into the press. Incredibly, he managed to restrain his homicidal urges during this time. But only for a short time. For nearly a year after August 1985, there was a pause in finding victims in both Rostov and Moscow who had the distinctive mutilations associated with the unidentified killer. During this period, Chikatilo altered his methods for a while. However, he couldn't keep up the change and eventually went back to his murderous rampage. He became an expert at avoiding the spurts of blood from his victims' bodies as he inflicted the knife wounds. Chikatilo would then stay beside his victims until their hearts had stopped beating. Their cries, the blood and the agony, giving him a certain macabre pleasure. As more victims connected to the manhunt started to emerge, and given that many of their bodies were found near railway stations, investigators took a proactive approach. They deployed undercover officers to discreetly capture video and photographic evidence of passengers on trains across the Rostov Oblast. In addition, they equipped several trains with covert cameras, hoping to capture moments of the victims being accompanied by their potential killers. By the time March 1990 rolled around, the number of victims found connected to the killer had risen to 9. The pressure on the police to crack the case was mounting, fueled by public outcry, media scrutiny, and the Soviet Ministry of the Interior breathing down their necks. It was a high-stakes situation that demanded a swift resolution. On November 6, 1990, the police finally got a break in the case. Chikatilo took the life of a 22-year-old woman named Svetlana Korostik near Donleskaz station, deep in the woodland. It was a gruesome act of violence and mutilation that sent shockwaves through the community. Little did Chikatilo know that an undercover officer named Igor Rybakov was watching his every move. Rybakov noticed something peculiar as Chikatilo returned to the railway platform. He went to a well and washed his hands and face. What caught Rybakov's attention even more were the grass and soil stains on Chikatilo's coat elbows, a small red smear on his cheek, and a severe wound on one of his fingers. Something just didn't add up. Chikatilo's appearance and behavior seemed suspicious, especially considering that people usually entered the woodland around that time of year to gather wild mushrooms. But he wasn't dressed like a typical forest goer. Plus, he had a nylon sports bag that wasn't quite suitable for carrying mushrooms. Rybakov decided to stop Chikatilo and check his papers, but unfortunately, he had no official grounds to arrest him. Later, when Rybakov returned to his office, he filed a routine report documenting the encounter, including the name of the person he had stopped at the station and the possible blood smear he had noticed on Chikatilo's cheek. On November 13th, they found Korostik's body, marking the 38th victim tied to the ongoing manhunt. The police immediately called in the officer responsible for surveillance at Donleskaz station and thoroughly reviewed the reports of all the men who had been stopped and questioned in the previous week. To their surprise, Chikatilo's name appeared among the reports, and it rang a bell for several officers who had been involved in the case before. In fact, he had been questioned back in 1984 and had even been on a suspect list circulated throughout the Soviet Union in 1987. Further investigations were carried out, including checking Chikatilo's employment history. It turned out that during the times when several victims linked to the investigation had been murdered, Chikatilo could be accounted for in various towns and cities based on his work records. Additionally, former colleagues from his teaching days revealed that he had been forced to resign from 2 teaching positions due to multiple complaints of inappropriate behavior and sexual assault lodged by his students. On November 14th, the police decided to put Chikatilo under surveillance. During their observation, they noticed him approaching young women or children on trains or buses, striking up conversations. If the person ended the conversation, Chikatilo would wait a few minutes before seeking out another potential conversation partner. After 6 days of monitoring, on November 20th, Chikatilo left his house carrying a large jar filled with beer that he had purchased from a small kiosk in a local park. He aimlessly wandered around Novichorkassk, trying to initiate contact with children he encountered along the way. It was during this time that, upon leaving a cafe, Chikatilo was apprehended by 4 undercover police officers, leading to his arrest. When Chikatilo was arrested, he didn't hesitate to express his disbelief. He argued that the police had made a mistake and even went on to complain about being arrested before in 1984 for the exact same string of murders. In response to the arrest, the police decided to do something unprecedented in the Soviet Union's history of serial killer investigations. They sought the expertise of a psychiatrist named Dr. Alexander Buchanovsky. They provided Buchanovsky with access to all the crime scene and medical examiner's reports, with the expectation that he would create a psychological profile of the killer for the investigators. It was a groundbreaking step in the case, marking the first time such a consultation took place in the country. Dr. Buchanovsky received an invitation to join the interrogation of the suspect, and he brought along his detailed 65-page psychological profile of Chikatilo. As they began their conversation, Buchanovsky read out selected passages from his profile. It didn't take long for Chikatilo to break down in tears, overwhelmed by the weight of his guilt. In a heartfelt confession to Buchanovsky, he admitted his involvement in the crimes for which he had been apprehended. As the evening progressed, the two engaged in deep discussions, and by the end, Buchanovsky informed the detectives that Chikatilo was prepared to make a full confession. As per the official record, Chikatilo admitted to 56 out of the 58 murders that the police had connected to him. However, he denied involvement in 2 additional murders that were initially attributed to him in 1986. Chikatilo provided comprehensive and detailed descriptions of each murder mentioned in the charges, aligning perfectly with the known facts surrounding each killing. When asked, he even sketched rough outlines of the crime scenes, marking the positions of the victims' bodies and notable landmarks nearby. The additional details he provided served as further evidence of his culpability. He was tried, found guilty, and given the death sentence. On February 14, 1994, Chikatilo's time on death row came to an end as he was escorted from his cell to a soundproofed room in Novichokhovsk prison. With a single gunshot fired behind his right ear, he was executed. His final resting place can be found in an unmarked grave within the prison cemetery. I would like to send my deepest condolences to the families of all the victims. Was Chikatilo the most prolific serial killer of the 20th century? Let me know what you think and comment below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more.